This is the principle of nourishment. You are what you eat. So far, we've explored deliberately developmental practice as a how to practice, but not so much the what. We're always practicing something. As I pointed out earlier, that which is coming in through the sense perceptions is likely being distorted by some kind of conditioning. And so it makes sense to look at that conditioning. But it also might make sense to look at what we are exposing our sense perceptions to. So, at the risk of insulting ourselves, we could even make a list of all of our inputs, all of the things we are exposing ourselves to on a daily basis, from what we eat and drink, to what we watch on screens, to our access to nature, to our medications, all kinds of things. And the items on that list which you discern as serving a practice of development, I would call nourishment. So notice that nourishment doesn't necessarily feel good initially. Things like eating right or getting exercise tend to have long-term nourishing payoffs over short-term pain in some way. And the opposite is also true. Things that feel really good may or may not be nourishing. Another distinction that can be made in practice is between healing the negative and cultivating nourishing positive. Psychotherapy in general has done a really nice job healing the negative. There's unlimited modalities which try to bring up the suppressed material, suppressed because we think of it as negative. So it's brought up, and then a good intervention or a healing medicinal aspect is brought to those parts in order for them to be healed and integrated. But there's a big difference between simply healing the negative and cultivating the positive. And we tend to favor one side or the other. And so, for example, crudely speaking, there are people who obsessively hunt shadows looking for healing the negative, and they fail to see the beauty that's right in front of them. And then alternatively, there are those who spend countless hours in workshops to self-improve and positive self-talk and use magical thinking to avoid the truly hard work of healing the negative. In the blog version of this principle, I give an in-depth example of a practice that completely uses nourishment. And so if you're interested in that, I'll refer you there. But for now, I want to make a couple of points related to psychotherapy and practice in general around nourishment. The first one is psychotherapy actually does cultivate and use nourishment. And what I mean by that is that language like resourcing is the ability to detect positive sense input in the present moment as a way of bringing in a quality that serves healing. So, for example, the somatic experiencing modality, which is especially adept in targeting trauma. One of the skills that is built is bringing a resource, or even finding a resource in the traumatic memory at times, to bring towards the frozen fight-flight response. And by bringing a resource toward a frozen aspect of ourselves, the body tends to relax significantly. And as the body relaxes, what's frozen can start to move and discharge and heal. Another example of nourishment would be in the internal family systems, which would be like what we bring to a wounded inner child, or what we would bring to an exiled part, in order that that part feels safe enough to come into awareness. So these are both examples of where actually detecting nourishment in the present moment field as a skill set is sound practice. One area where I think we could be doing better is in the domain of knowledge. It strikes me that doctors today complain that their patients often arrive to their appointments with abundant knowledge of what their ailment could or couldn't be, and challenge their expertise of sometimes 30 years of education. And in 10 years of doing psychotherapy, that's not happened for me once. So there's something to be looked at there in terms of our comfort in taking charge of our physical health through knowledge, and not so much through our mental health and our development. I can't see why that is. There are literally tens of thousands of psychology books available, and granted, some of them are not very helpful, but even doing some of the hard work to sort the wheat from the chaff is developmental, because the person who is doing that is actually sensing what is nourishing as an input and what isn't. We could also encourage clients to ask their therapist for further reading or further resources which may be nourishing to the developmental journey. And perhaps even more salient in the area of knowledge as nourishing input is around the idea that anyone who enters psychotherapy or any developmental practice is entering it through a paradigm or model of change. I've cited a couple of models of change just in this presentation alone. Okay, and these models of change are largely unconscious. So what is thought to be possible, and the how, when, and the where of change is likely wired into our frames and our worldview. And so people who take in knowledge of psychology and development have a better chance of making their paradigms and models of change both conscious and more flexible, more able to evolve. So the greater the understanding of psychology and how development actually works, the greater the self-agency for change. And by now you've noticed that I've weaved some amount of developmental theory into each of the principles. And this is because of exactly what I'm talking about, that if we have a little bit of knowledge for how development works and we enjoy learning how development works, we have much more self-agency in terms of what we practice, what inputs we're using, and how we approach practice in general. There's one more piece that's hanging here around nourishment in the practice, which would be rest. Rest as nourishment is conscious rest. It's not checking out or collapsing or really even sleep. It's the challenging practice of detecting positive sensation in periods of what appear to be inactivity. And so resting consciously, surrendering, letting go, not interfering, and allowing the positive sensations to be detected and received is probably an essential practice in the long run of the deliberately developmental journey. It's probably also one of the hardest.